Welcome back to our thought series on expanding opportunity for students. I'm so glad you're here for part two of this conversation. In our last episode, we talked with Brian Lightfoot from Access Opportunity about the power of partnerships and how schools are working with outside organizations to expand the students' networks, open new doors. And one thing we were left with was Brian reminding us that success after graduation isn't just about what you know. It's not even about who you know, but it's truly about who knows you. And that idea of being seen, being known, that's really stuck with me since that conversation with Brian, which brings us to today's conversation. We're living in a moment where technology, especially AI, is really reshaping how students access information, guidance, post-secondary planning. But what are we gaining in speed and scale? And what might we be losing in that human connection of who knows you? How are you being seen? How are you being known? That Brian kind of talked about. So to help us unpack that today, I'm thrilled to have Julia Freeland Fisher, the Director of Education at the Clayton Christensen Institute, and one of my most favorite voices on social capital in education. Julia, through your work, you kind of explore how we can design technology, not just to deliver content, but to deepen connection. So students aren't just users of the information, but part of the networks that know them and support them. So today we'll be asking, can AI support the kind of relationships that help students thrive after high school? And what's at stake if we get that balance wrong? So let's dive in. Hi, Julia.
Hi, Miron. Thank you so much for having me and for diving into this important and fascinating conversation.
Yes, we're excited. Kind of just want to open and we'll let the conversation take us where it takes us. You've written really beautifully about how AI tools like chat boxes are reshaping access to guidance. What's the biggest opportunity you see for AI to expand rather than like restrict students' networks and what happens to them after high school and how they plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just by way of background, I've been looking at kind of the importance of social capital and networks as a kind of hidden currency in the opportunity equation for almost a decade. That's been the focus of my research. And along comes ChatGPT and a whole bunch of other tools, 2022, 2023, into the mainstream sort of consciousness. And like, you don't have to, you can be on LinkedIn for like 30 seconds to get like a hot take on how AI is going to transform education for the better, right? As I was watching that unfold, I really zeroed in on, I want to understand how this is going to impact college and career guidance. Not because that's the only piece of the education equation where AI is going to have an impact, but because that's a piece of the equation where the system has always been so woefully under-resourced. And the people in the positions of counselors and advisors have been so over leveraged, right? So, like, average of 350 students to a high school counselor, it looks much worse in lesser resourced high schools. Those counselors are spending, on average, one study in Texas suggests about 6% of their time talking to students about careers, which is so little relative to what we know young people need to imagine many future possible selves and understand what careers in their region look like. So it's a space where we need more. And we need more conversations, more advice, more guidance. And anyone who's used ChatGPT or other AI tools on the market now know that this idea of getting advice, help, support is starting to become a real use case, like for adults and young people alike. So, the opportunity is to start to match the support students need with what we can actually give them with limited resources. The opportunity is also to build tools that provide the kind of on-demand and relevant information that we know young people need, and that like a single human brain of a counselor who's being asked to be a jack of all trades could never contain those multitudes, right? Like, it's absurd to even ask that of them. But the last big opportunity that relates back to this decade of research I've been doing on social capital is that we actually have a chance to use AI to disrupt the social capital advantage. So, like, when we say social capital, when we say networks, like it can sound good, but it's not a neutral concept. Social capital is a force that perpetuates inequity in our society because it's exclusive networks through which information, resources, and opportunities flow that give some people a lot and shut a lot of other people out, right? Segregated by race, class, ethnicity, language, ability, disability, all of that, right? And so oftentimes we want to ensure students have social networks, but we have to also look at the other side of that coin of like right now we live in a society where resources flow through exclusive networks in ways that perpetuate inequality. So what happens if we suddenly have a tool that's conversational, that's engaging, that has a lot of information at its proverbial technical fingertips that can suddenly provide information that historically has been locked in exclusive networks? Right? That can suddenly provide really robust understandings of a young person's options, of it, help them reflect on their skills and think about fit, even in an industry where they may not have inherited any connections, right? And so that power to actually sort of leapfrog what has historically been locked in exclusive networks is the exciting upside that I think explains why, even in a moment where ed tech is not seeing a ton of capital flowing in, where investment is not as high as it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, there's a lot of excitement around navigation and guidance technology. And that's sort of what we set out to study.
I hear you. And I kind of want to back us up a little bit to just make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying. So in this space, right? Like when Brian said it's not who knows you, I mean, not who you know, it's who knows you. What I'm hearing you say is historically there's I mean, we all know there's systems like your people know people, you get seen. It's
rocket science. Yeah.
it's not just about like the knowledge that I have, but it's really what are the connections, and we know that they're just systems in play and who has the connections and who doesn't. And so that's just kind of been the way that it's rolled. And so you have to network. We've seen a lot of schools and programs teaching kids how to network and how to get internships and how to know people, but there's still the reality of roadblocks. And what I'm hearing you say is AI could possibly remove some of those and almost level the playing field.
Yeah, again, it's like I don't have to know the right person to learn about what it means to navigate a neurosurgery career. I can
Yeah.
ask ChatGPT, am I going to get, now we'll get into this in a second because you know, Madeline, I am not, I have some real doomer thoughts about what I'm outlining here, and I will get to live into them in a second. But some of the resources, some of the capital and social capital that right now travels through human to human conversations, some of that can now be delivered through bots. And
Yeah.
that we should not sleep on the potential that we could disrupt some of what's been very unequally distributed through human networks through chatbots. And so that's my, like you asked me to start positive, so I'm starting positive here. That's like a real potential. And it's actually the place where I constantly check myself when I'm heading in a more doomer direction, because people deserve accurate on-demand information that helps them accomplish their goals. And AI can, and I think will be a tool to serve that up in unprecedented ways.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm having a thought here. I appreciate the balance, and I do think AI can help a lot in systems that are stretched thin already. You know, you're saying 6% of a counselor's time is spent on having career conversations with students. So we already know that human connection is stretched thin. So the idea that chat GPT or any type of AI now can give you the information you need, you don't have to, as a student, cram it into that 6% you're getting with the counselor is beautiful. But I have a question, or something comes up for me that has two different parts. One is, well, how do we ensure that this AI tool actually is a real pathway to economic mobility and post-secondary success, and not just more information? Because it's great to have more information, but how is that a direct connection, or is it? And then the other half is, in systems already stretched thin, what are the hidden costs we should be paying attention to, especially when it comes to human connection and guidance?
Yeah, so that like little thing coming up in you is like the same thing that was coming up in me a couple years ago as I was starting to watch this market unfold, which is like I see the potential, particularly for better on-demand information at the press of a button. And again, I think our young people deserve that. What I have also seen in my research is that we as an education system have not done the work of establishing that every young person also deserves human connection. And that is a provocative statement on purpose because as I have advocated for this idea that social capital matters immensely in the opportunity equation, I have hit up against time and again the fact that our schools do not treat relationships and networks as an outcome in their own right. They're not optimized around that. Our policies treat relationships as inputs to learning, development, and graduation, but not as outcomes in their own right. And so it's no surprise that our technology market does the exact same thing, that very little technology is optimized for connection. And so my fear is exactly what you're getting at, which is that the hidden cost is that we will build a whole suite of tools, in fact, an entire infrastructure premised on guidance that solves for information gaps, but not connection gaps. And that we know social capital is one of the leading predictors of economic mobility. And so it's a blind spot that like we've got to call out now before this market matures too much so that we can get the best of both worlds. Like, yes, rich information tools, but how are they designed to be pro-social in nature, and how are they actually ensuring that young people are having more conversations with human beings, not just with bots, about their futures? So we can get into like technically what that looks like, but that's kind of the brass tacks of I think the moment we're in and why I get so fired up about about human connection in the age of AI, especially in this navigation and guidance conversation. Because like just to break down your question real quick, does information do anything for economic mobility? Absolutely. There's like pretty rigorous research showing better information for college going leads to better matriculation and persistence, right? Like even just a pamphlet, right? Which sounds simplistic, but like there is research showing that better information can lead to better post-secondary outcomes, which we know is also a predictor of economic mobility. So like, let's not ignore the fact that information matters. It's that we routinely discount how much connections also matter on that pathway to economic mobility. So it's a both and. I don't want to sort of pit information connection against one another.
I appreciate that. I want to pull back because you said something very heavy at the beginning and then you just kept going. I was like, wait. That schools have not done the work of establishing human connections and relationships as their own right. And I want to pull back, as someone who's a former educator, I can see why that becomes like a what? Everything I do is based on relationships and, the age old thing, they don't care what you know until they know that you care, and so I just want to pause and give you space in the kind of non-ed speak.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say that? Because to hear it, I see when you said bump up against, there's this feeling from educators like, wait a minute now, relationships have, but I think it's really interesting when you say it's an output versus, so can we just take a moment there and yeah, like give me a little bit about what that means and when you say that.
Yeah, so I may not use, I'm still going to use ed speak, and I'm probably going to use like market speak. So keep pushing me to like stop being a think tank asshole here. So, but I just want to I want to ask back to your point. Do we reward teachers who build strong relationships with their students? Do we reward principals that create an environment where every student in their school graduates with a network? It's invisible work in the system right now. It is not part of the systems and structures of what we incentivize schools to do. And as a result, it's left to chance and heroic individuals. So like nothing I'm saying is a statement about educator intention. It's really about the systems level designs. And none of this is also like anti-test score. I want kids to be literate, to know math, all of that stuff. It's just that we almost have taken for granted that schools are relational spaces in a way that I think is catching up to us. It's catching up to us both if you look at like the data on engagement in high school and the fact that teacher-student relationships really weaken over time as students get older, and that has a lot to do with how we've designed our high schools and our accountability system. It also is going to catch up to us in an age of AI where suddenly we have tools that can mimic humans, but are not actually human connection. So like 10 years ago, if I was running around being like, every child, like human connection is a human right for every student, it would have felt like a little bit out of touch and strange because like no one is arguing against that, Julia. Now I think AI is actually going to hit up against that. And we have to put a line in the sand to say, well, AI could help our young people become more literate. It could help our young people achieve more of their academic potential. But we have to also be a wellspring of human connection if we want young people thriving. And back to our original point of this conversation, if we care about economic mobility.
Yeah. Thank you for clearing. I hear you. You're saying relationships in education are treated as an input, meaning like a thing that I need to do to get to the scores.
To get to the test scores, to get to graduation.
Yeah. And in this age of, which worked until then, because it was like, cool, you get the relationships and you also are learning. And that's beautiful. That's
I think you should have been rewarded even more if you were doing a really great job on the relationship front, but that was never really baked into teacher evaluation systems. So
true.
Different conversation.
True. I can see that. I am now hearing the urgency behind. Now, if AI comes in as this thing that can give you information, and relationships were only seen as an input to get to the end goal of information, but we can now get to information with an AI tool. If we didn't explicitly value relationships before, you can see it fading out essentially. And I think another thing you said was, if 10 years ago I had said human connection is a right for every student, it would have been wild. And now I can see why you're saying that may actually need to be a rallying cry as we enter into a space where you can get information without human connections or relationship.
Can I just say one more thing just related to what you just said around inputs? Like, this is why I love that you're orienting this conversation around the long-term economic outcomes of students in Houston, because it's not going to show up right away. This cost does not show up right away, right? If a young person is not gradually building a network over the course of their educational journey, the moment that starts to become a real deficit or cost to them is when they start looking for internships and jobs, right? It also probably shows up in other ways in their emotional lives. So I'm not trying to sound overly like labor market oriented, but just because of the topic that you're exploring here. So this is where like our current measurement systems, not just related to social capital, related to a bunch of things, are so point in time that we're not doing a good job of thinking like 2, 3, 4 years out. What are the assets that we would like to have outlasted our intervention that are setting up the student for success? So ideally, relationships outlast intervention so young people can continue to go back to the people in their lives as circumstances change, as they start to look for opportunities and the like. But if we have relegated relationships to inputs, I know this is so jargony, you can cut all of this if you don't want me saying it. If we relegate them to inputs, like we're not designing for that. We're not designing for relationships outlasting interventions and creating this long tail of impact that we know could help boost longitudinal outcomes.
What does it mean when you say relationships outlast interventions?
Meaning I go to a career fair, or I do a high school internship, or I'm in an advisory in school, and the both peer and adult connections I'm forming in those experiences outlast them. I stay in touch with at least a subset of the people. And like some of this obviously happens naturally. Like you don't need a think tank asshole to be like, keep in touch with people. But the intentionality around that is very much missing from like the traditional ed reform playbook right now. And the mental model again of is if a relationship is just an input, it's just instrumental in service of academic learning, you may be not investing as much in that relationship and sort of the trust building on the front end and all the things that could make it stickier long term in the course of that intervention.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about all that you've said. I'm thinking about my own children, and you're right. Relationships aren't really a feel-good bonus. They are a key ingredient in economic mobility. And that's not, there's research from leaders in the field. Shetty has said relationships matter. And we know it in our own lived experience of economic mobility, beyond this idea of an internship, beyond this idea of these very formal relationships.
Yeah, form versus function kind of, yeah.
The idea that I'm in front of a human and making eye contact and learning about myself and reflecting in a way that really shifts how we think about student support in AI. And so I think it comes back to this question, because we've also acknowledged that it can give students knowledge who didn't have access to it before. So there's this two sides. There's a lot of positive to using AI for guidance. So you said relationships aren't a feel-good bonus. What I'm hearing and is really resonating with me as a parent is that they are a key ingredient in economic mobility. I think about, yes, I love that AI is going to give my children all the information and there's no roadblock to this gatekeeper of information. But at the same time, economic mobility does lie in human connection. And that's something a lot of research is showing. A lot of leaders in the field are showing that relationships matter in economic mobility and social capital. And so knowing that that's true, the big question is, how do we harness the good of this technology of AI to help build connections rather than replace them? And how do we ensure that using AI, we don't unintentionally flatten relationship pathways and human connection? Because we know that's the bridge to economic mobility, especially for students with less access to social capital.
Yes. Yeah, and on that last piece, less access to potentially knowledge economy social capital, right? Like kinship networks and stuff like can actually look quite equal across the socioeconomic spectrum, but it's really access to sort of people working in industries that could give you access to an upwardly mobile job is where that starts to break down. Maybe I'll give just a really concrete example, and I want to give this because I actually think we've fallen into a little bit of a trap that I even saw pan out in my research of like talking about AI for the sake of information. And that's sort of how I framed it up front. But I want to nuance that a little bit and then talk about what some of these benefits that could get to like AI for networks, AI for connection. So in some ways, I think the like current myth in the education space is like AI can do information and administrative stuff, and humans will then do this human stuff. As we talk to over 30 providers in this navigation and guidance tools space, that started to get messier because we heard folks who went in, for example, with like a really tidy chart of like the bot's going to do this and then humans are going to do this. And they discovered, oh, wait a second, this bot is actually better at motivational interviewing than some of our human coaches, right? It's actually better at some of these things that we thought of as innately or especially human. And so I want to push on like, it's not just information. It is emotional support increasingly that's getting engineered into these tools. It is motivational support. And so we got to keep reckoning with like how far along the technology is relative to whatever we think of as like inherently human. But here's a great example of like where that can still be in service of helping young people forge connections, not instead of. There's a tool called Goldie that's being piloted right now by a nonprofit called Climb Together, which was started by a woman, Nitzan Pellman, who ran a workforce organization for a number of years that was really focused on helping individuals from low-income households, job seekers from low-income households, some of whom had college degrees, but most of whom didn't, break into upwardly mobile jobs. And there was a big social capital component to the program. So they took everything they learned in terms of sort of curriculum and experiences to help those individuals deepen and diversify their networks in service of upwardly mobile jobs. And they have trained a bot named Goldie on kind of that process of helping individual job seekers sort of tell their story and think about how they are going to reach out to their existing and new networks to look for jobs. And as they've piloted Goldie, I'm just quoting her on something she literally told me last week. One of the users said to her, Goldie is like pulling skills out of me. Meaning Goldie was helping this individual see over the course of her experiences and jobs up to that point, skills that she wouldn't have necessarily put forth in an interview because she didn't necessarily have sort of the language to describe them, or she didn't think of that as professional experience in the way that we really like under index on all sorts of experiences people may bring to the table when they're applying to a job. And that individual is now equipped to go have conversations with prospective employers and tell her story in an authentic way, but a way that this like well-trained bot actually helped her arrive at. Now, like whether that sounds dystopian to you or not, like feel in your body whatever you feel when you hear that. But it's an example of a bot going further than just information, right? This bot is like engaging with this human and helping the human refine and expand their sense of self and story. And that is equipping them to go have a type of conversation in the labor market that really matters, which is like the ridiculous question at the beginning of any interview of like, tell me about yourself, which is actually like a very high stakes test, but it's framed as like a casual, tell me about yourself, right? Tell me about yourself is like, give me your transcript, but in like charming layperson language. So, so I just want to, sorry, that was verbose, but I think bots are doing more than just information, but well-designed bots and interventions can actually do that in service of connection. Now, I can count on one hand the number of tools that I think are doing that type of work, right? There is not a market for tools that are trying to tee young people up to overcome help-seeking behavior, to overcome stereotype threat, to put themselves out there and to be successful in rooms where people who look like them may not be well represented. So like and we can talk about what those tools are. I can provide you a list of them, but it's a tiny market right now because this idea of social connection as a good unto itself is still not something that schools really pay for.
Yeah. I think just that concrete example you gave, though, is making me think, okay, so back up to what we were saying earlier around what the pitfalls potential. Like, well, when this place it is building a relationship, I think the gap there is what we talked about with Brian in the previous episode is still people don't know you. But it almost feels like it is filling the gap of a relationship and human connection and getting you to know yourself. And so
by a different means. Yeah. And the fear, right, is like if a bot does that and a human doesn't, is that one less person who's invested in your future? Right? That's my always like fear. If a bot does that instead of a human, is that one less person, one fewer individual who is invested in that young person's future?
I think that is a kind of mic drop moment that we're not considering, that I had not considered. If a bot does that instead of a human, is that one less person invested in your future? When I think about post-secondary success, economic mobility, it is a collective effort of people who are pouring into you for this mobility. And I think I just have to pause and not let that line go past because I had not thought of it that way. And that's a very deep thought of is that one less human invested in your future, and what does that even mean in a new world?
And let me say one more thing on that. Sam Altman, founder of OpenAI, like famously said a few weeks ago, I mean, he's like so quotable in like a lot of problematic ways, but he was like, young people don't make any decisions now without talking to ChatGPT. My concern here is that we're seeing this like very rapid rise of the self-help bot. And the other side of the self-help coin is that we are leaving young people to fend for themselves and that we are not investing in human help, right? So that's the other way to like what I'm trying to articulate there, right? Is like, okay, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, turn to ChatGPT, use these tools, but also talk to as many people as possible about your dreams, about what you're trying to do, about getting their wisdom and advice, right? Like if we're just scaling conversations with bots and not with humans, that's going to leave a lot of young people at a disadvantage, particularly in a labor market that's going to be so crazy in the coming years.
Yeah, it begs the question, is the goal to make career post-secondary guidance more efficient or more human? And like, can these things go together in the age of AI when there's a lot to unpack there?
More efficient, more human, and more equal, right? Like, and that's all the sort of equity angle is always front of mind for me because it's like if we give young people from low income households these bots, they may get better information than they're right now getting through an overstretched system that can't give them a ton of high touch advice and guidance. But we will not be building their networks that we know are a key ingredient to economic mobility.
So you've talked about how relationships often serve as a safety net when systems fail. And even hearing you say that's one less human, the belief that the more relationships you have, the more kind of safety nets you have. And when systems fail, you have these relationships. So if AI becomes the system, what safety net do we need to build around for students who are going through public school systems that are increasingly going to be using AI for post-secondary guidance?
Yeah, I mean, what we need is what the youth development research has told us for like decades, right? We need what John Zaff and Shannon Vargas, two researchers from BU, now Zaff is at Northeastern, call webs of support. And just one nuance on webs of support, because I feel like some of this literature has gotten lost in the like one caring adult axiom that you hear a lot in education right now. It's like young people need more than one caring adult. What they need is a web of individuals that are actually differently situated in their life. They need peers, near peers, and adults. And the reason for that is that those different types of relationships can offer very different types of support, all of which is valuable, and its diversity is valuable. And so, right, like sticking to labor market for a second, like a peer can help you overcome the isolation of job seeking, right? Or under unemployment, right? If being unemployed is an incredibly isolating experience, but what we've seen in programs that are doing a really great job at this is like being in a cohort of people that are overcoming that together is a huge psychological boost. A near peer can help you navigate a labor market that is changing so rapidly that unfortunately older people like you and I don't actually have the best real-time knowledge of what it takes to break into an entry-level job. And then an older, wiser, or just older, depending adult, right, may have access to power, to cash, to wisdom that like only accrues over time. And so like there's other reasons, for emotional reasons, that you need those webs of support. But again, sticking to this labor market kind of conversation, that web really matters, and being intentional about cultivating that web and helping young people understand that they are members of those webs. And all of that becomes, I think, really critical the more bots are in their lives, right? Because the future I see emerging, if you read not just what's being built right now, but even some of the evidence being built around therapy bots, tutoring bots, mentoring bots, is like we are quickly headed towards a future where my toddlers, when they're 12, this is not going to happen if I have anything to do with it, but are going to have an AI coach, an AI tutor, an AI therapist, an AI mentor, probably AI friends, and potentially AI lovers, right? That's not the web of support that I want them to have, but that's going to be a web of support.
But if you're saying, earlier that increasingly and surprisingly, AI is actually able to do this human connection even more. It helped people pull out skills they didn't know. Then is it fear of something new? Or when you say like, if you have anything to do with it, because if it's able to do it, then talk me through why not?
Yeah, there's a human philosophical reason for me, and then a very practical one. Let's start with the practical one that we've been talking about this whole time, which is like, I know they need networks to live choice-filled lives. So we're not going to not invest in diverse networks. But then there's like the much more like human element of all of this, which is I want them to care for others and be cared for. And I think that is fundamentally part of the human experience, and AI doesn't care about you. And that the cost to the individual soul and also to social cohesion of that future, where we've solved all our problems, right? You have less anxiety, you have better information, you know more math, right? But we don't care about each other, is we've solved all our problems, but we're less connected, potentially more miserable, and we're not looking out for one another. And so then I'm like, well, why are we here? That's, you don't have to, yeah.
I thank you. I think there's been a ton of research around what happens to students when they leave high school, and how do we create a kindergarten through 12th grade experience that will best set students up for economic mobility, meaning that they will have more choices, they're able to make more money, they're able to have more opportunities when they walk across the stage in 12th grade. And I appreciate you for taking a moment and diving into with us the AI world. What does that mean for how we think about this idea of giving students more opportunities when they leave 12th grade, especially as AI begins to replace guidance counseling and career counseling in public schools? So thank you for helping us think more deeply about the promise and the pitfalls of AI in college and career counseling in our public schools. If there's one thing I'm taking away, it's this: technology might help us scale information. AI might help students gather knowledge. It will also be really efficient in helping them reflect on themselves and prepare for experiences that will allow them to interview and things like that. But it can't replace the power of being known and being seen by someone else. And you said something that's really sticking with me, that students they don't just need one adult or one answer. They need this web of people, each situated differently in their lives. And that idea reshapes how we think about guidance, opportunity, and what it really takes to move towards economic mobility. And that brings us to where we're headed next. In our upcoming episode, we'll continue this conversation and zoom in on the role of those people in that web, in those students' lives, not as tech adopters or like system designers, but as relationship builders. Because there are schools that are never going to get flashy AI tools. They're never going to get outside partnerships. They're not going to be able to pay for external partners. So the question is then, what can teachers and families do every day to help students recognize and grow the relationships that are already around them? And we'll explore how small, consistent actions can help students feel seen, supported, and connected. And this idea of why relationships shouldn't just be the path to opportunity, but the point of education itself, like how you started with this, that the point of education really is through relationships. You are learning durable skills. You are learning yourself. You are learning your others. There's so much thinking that goes into that. So until then, thank y'all for listening. We hope that you'll join us. Julia, if you had a sentence to leave us with in this idea of AI, public education, and AI being used more regularly for guidance, career counseling for students, what would your one sentence be?
In the age of AI, social connection is going to be both more valuable and more vulnerable. So we need to remain vigilant and innovative about how we surround each and every young person with a network that can help them achieve their goals.